What if everything you thought you knew about the start of World War II is a lie? What if the real spark wasn't just Germany's invasion of Poland, but a chain of betrayals and secret deals? The textbooks say Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939, and war erupted. But that version is too simple. It hides the deep roots of manipulation, greed, and broken promises. In the next 9 minutes, I'll show you 3 shocking truths that history textbooks conveniently left out. And you'll see how World War II should never have happened the way we think. First, we go back to the end of World War I and the seeds of resentment the victorious powers planted. Then we'll expose the appeasement scandal, the secret pact between Hitler and Stalin, and how betrayal on all sides lit the fuse. Finally, we confront controversial theories that blame more than just Germany. And you decide, who really started WWII II? When the guns fell silent in 1918, the world believed a lasting peace had been won. But inside the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, the treaty being drafted was one of vengeance, not justice. The idealistic vision of a peace without victory was cast aside. The final document was a hammer blow. The infamous war guilt clause forced Germany to accept sole blame for the devastation. Its territories were carved up, its military dismantled, and it was stripped of all its colonies. On top of this moral humiliation came crippling financial reparations, a debt designed to keep Germany on its knees for a generation. The economic fallout was catastrophic. To make payments, the new Weimar government printed money, triggering hyperinflation on a scale never seen before. The German mark became worthless. Life savings vanished. People hauled wheelbarrows of cash to buy a single loaf of bread. This chaos fueled a deep sense of national humiliation. A poisonous myth took hold, the stab in the back, claiming the army was undefeated but betrayed by politicians at home. The German people, starving and demoralized, felt abandoned by the world and their own leaders, creating a wound that refused to heal. Beyond Germany, the peacemakers redrew the map of Europe, shattering the old Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires. New nations like Poland and Czechoslovakia were born, supposedly on the principle of self-determination. But the borders, drawn by distant diplomats, were clumsy. They ignored centuries of ethnic history, trapping millions, including large German-speaking populations, as resentful minorities in new countries. Instead of resolving conflicts, these new frontiers created fresh flashpoints, sowing the seeds of future disputes across Central Europe. This storm of economic ruin, political instability, and national shame was a breeding ground for extremism. The fragile Weimar democracy seemed incapable of providing solutions. Into this void stepped Adolf Hitler, a demagogue who skillfully exploited the nation's grievances. He railed against the Versailles Dictate and the November criminals who signed it. He offered a seductive promise: vengeance for Germany's humiliation, restoration of its former glory, and the strength of a single powerful leader to end the chaos. The treaty meant to end all wars had instead paved the road to another. Adolf Hitler's ascent was no sudden coup. It was a masterclass in exploiting a nation's despair. The humiliating Treaty of Versailles had left Germany economically crippled and psychologically scarred. The Great Depression amplified this misery, creating mass unemployment and shattering faith in the fragile Weimar Republic. Into this chaos, Hitler and the Nazi Party offered simple, violent answers. Through Goebbels' masterful propaganda and Hitler's own hypnotic oratory, they promised to restore German pride, provide work, and vanquish the spectre of communism. He gave a desperate people a powerful narrative and, crucially, enemies to blame for their suffering. He positioned himself not as a politician, but as a savior. Once Chancellor, Hitler immediately began shredding the Treaty of Versailles. He launched a massive, clandestine rearmament program. In 1936, he took his first great gamble, marching troops into the demilitarized Rhineland. The Allies, fearing another war, did nothing. This inaction was a green light. Factories churned out tanks and aircraft, and the Wehrmacht swelled with new recruits. In March 1938, under the pretext of uniting all German peoples, the Heimensreich policy, his troops marched into Austria, completing the Anschluss to thunderous staged applause. His next target was Czechoslovakia, where he manufactured a crisis over the German-speaking Sudetenland. Britain and France, haunted by the memory of World War I's slaughter, desperately sought to avoid another conflict. This led to the policy of appeasement, championed by British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. The strategy was to grant Hitler what were seen as his reasonable territorial demands in order to sate his appetite for expansion. This culminated in the infamous Munich Agreement of September 1938. There, without consulting their Czechoslovakian allies, Britain and France handed the Sudetenland to Germany. Chamberlain returned home, infamously declaring he had secured peace for our time. But Hitler saw appeasement not as diplomacy, but as weakness. The policy only emboldened him. The final proof came in March 1939, when he broke his Munich promise and invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia. This was no longer about uniting Germans, it was about conquest. The illusion of peace was shattered. Jolted into action, Britain and France guaranteed Poland's independence, drawing a line in the sand. But Hitler, now utterly convinced the West would not fight, simply pushed further. He demanded the Polish corridor and the city of Danzig. The West's credibility was gone. The dice were loaded, and the world was just waiting for the spark. Here is where the plot thickens. On August 23, 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact. On paper, we won't attack each other. Secretly, they agreed to divide Poland. Hitler got a green light to invade Poland, without fear of Soviet interference. Stalin got his share of territory. This pact shocked the world. The two ideologies that seemed destined to hate each other became conspirators in slaughter. Some historians argue this was more than opportunism. It was an act of treachery that shifted the balance irreversibly toward war. September 1, 1939, German forces pour across the border into Poland. Tanks, airstrikes, blitzkrieg unleashed. 2 days later, Britain and France issue ultimatums. When Germany refuses, they declare war. The world is at war. But note, Germany had secured its flanks via the Soviet deal. The war was no accident. It was premeditated. Yet here is the controversy. Should we say World War II began here, or is that just the tip of the iceberg? The story of World War II often begins with a single aggressor. But what if the path to war was paved by more than just one man's ambition? To understand the catastrophe, we must dig deeper into the shadows of diplomacy and power. Scholars have unearthed controversial theories that challenge the simple narrative. First, the actions of the Western allies. Appeasement is often seen as a naive attempt to avoid war. But some historians argue it was a calculated gamble. Many in Britain and France saw Stalin's Soviet Union as a greater long-term threat than Hitler's Germany. They hoped to channel German aggression eastward, pitting the two totalitarian regimes against each other. The Munich Agreement, where Czechoslovakia was sacrificed, wasn't just weakness, it was a strategic choice, hoping to use Germany as a bulwark against communism. Then there's the uncomfortable question of profit. After the Great Depression, some historians contend that powerful elites in the US and Britain saw a European conflict as an opportunity. War meant massive government contracts for rearmament, a chance to jump-start stagnant industries. A redrawn map of Europe could also eliminate economic competitors and open new markets. For a select few, war wasn't just inevitable, it was potentially very profitable. The focus on great powers also obscures the volatile situation in Eastern Europe. The region was a tinderbox of unresolved border disputes and national ambitions from World War I. Covert arms deals and secret pacts created a fragile web of alliances. While Hitler was the main aggressor, he wasn't the only one. For instance, in 1938, as Germany dismembered Czechoslovakia, Poland annexed the disputed territory of Zaolzie. These power plays created an atmosphere of instability that Hitler expertly exploited. Finally, the most provocative theory centers on Joseph Stalin. What if the Soviet Union actively provoked German aggression? According to this view, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was a stroke of Machiavellian genius. By signing a non-aggression treaty with Hitler, Stalin gave him a green light to invade Poland and turn west against France and Britain. The goal? To have the capitalist and fascist powers exhaust each other, leaving a weakened Europe ripe for Soviet domination. Of course, these theories don't absolve Hitler of primary responsibility, but they reveal a more complex picture. The road to World War II was not a straight line, but a tangled web of fear, greed, and miscalculation, woven by many hands. Of course, many mainstream historians firmly reject or challenge these fringe ideas. The vast majority agree. Hitler's aggression was the decisive, primary cause. The real debate is not whether Germany started WWII, but how many other actors share a degree of responsibility. We need balance, acknowledging German culpability, but not ignoring the roles of appeasement, betrayal, and political opportunism across Europe. So after all this, what really started World War II? 1. The legacy of Versailles and deep resentment gave fertile ground for revenge. 2. The policy of appeasement and tolerance of expansion empowered Hitler. 3. The Nazi-Soviet pact was a betrayal that cleared his path. 4. And hidden behind it all were power politics, opportunism, and complicity from multiple states. In short, Wu was not born from one act, but from failure after failure of diplomacy, deterrence, and morality. And most shocking of all, we're still living with the consequences of those choices today. Which of these truths surprised you the most? Do you believe Hitler acted alone, or was Europe complicit? Drop a comment below with your view. I'll pin the most thought-provoking. If you want a video exploring what if the Soviet Union never allied with Hitler, let me know. Smash like if you learned something new, subscribe for deep history breakdowns, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next twist in the story.